I'm going to try to talk about ideas that are moistened. Hey, great to see you. Thanks for being the crew. I'm going to try to talk about a couple of ideas that are very important to me. If I were to try to explain my artistic practice, I would say I really like making things and I really like solving problems. And that if we take all of the labels away, you have a problem solver and a creative guy. But because of my curiosity, sometimes the problems that I solve, they look very different from other problems that I solve. So when you live on the west side of Chicago, you grow up, and in the 80s, when I was a young person, our urban cities in America, they were really hit hard by the invitation of pretty dangerous drugs, heroin, cocaine, crack cocaine, combined with a disinvestment in our cities, combined with a lack of economic opportunities for the people who work there, combined with a lack of social services that could help make things stable. Some people would call it a social, like a safety net, right? So that for, let's say, young men, American men returning from the Second World War, the government ensured that for men who were in the war, that they would have opportunities to buy a house when they got back from war, that they would be able to go to school, and they would be able to go to school at no cost, that they were strongly encouraged to have deep family ties. And so if you had a wife and you had some kids and you were a husband, you get some money for having babies and having a wife, to reduce your taxes, that there were things that happened in the world to incentivize people's stability. And I think that by the 80s, some of those things were no longer happening in the community that I lived in. One of the challenges that I felt most was that there were beautiful buildings around and no one lived in them. And these buildings, they were abandoned for lots of different reasons. And immediately this is making me think about both Chicago and Tokoname. So I have Tokoname in my head. They were abandoned because the matriarch of the family had grown old and she died. And then the children were no longer interested in living where mom or dad had lived. So there was no one to continue to occupy the building. The matriarch, who was probably at the height of good American values, hardworking, even if she didn't make a lot of money, was fastidious in her investments, but maybe didn't have a lot of money to leave the children. The children inherit the building without the capacity to continue to afford the building, and the building goes fallow. Or, even better, the children do better because the matriarch was smart and the matriarch sent the kids to school. The kids go to school, and after graduating Harvard, they end up at Kinsey or they end up at Goldman Sachs, and they say, Mom, I don't want to go back to Detroit. I don't want to go back to Ames, Iowa. I don't want to go back to Tokoname. I want to live in a big city. So you have these buildings. But I think part of what was exciting for me was that even though the buildings were empty, I believe the buildings continue to have spiritual life in them. And that animism, in a way, this idea that there continues to be life within these things, these objects, these buildings, these spaces. That is very, very important to me and something that I deeply believe. So I found myself acquiring this small building on your left, I think my right. And it was my first house that I bought on a street called Dorchester. Even though it's a very modest building, it was very expensive for me relative to my budget. But I was determined to get out of my daddy's house and begin a life of my own, 30 years old. So I bought the house. It used to be a candy store, and everybody on the block referred to it as the candy store. That was in 2006. In 2008, the real estate market burst. I didn't realize at that point that I would go on to acquire more buildings, but in 2008, the building next door was available. I acquired the house thinking it would be my studio. But after the acquisition of the house, thinking of Tokoname again, the house was maybe $18,000 US. It was really affordable. That after its acquisition, I didn't have any more money for a long time. So I thought, what I'll do with the house is I will gut it, remove all of the plaster, all of the lath, anything that was not absolutely necessary to the house. And for the first couple years, I would simply sweep the house, making it the cleanest house, at least on my block, probably the cleanest house in Chicago next to my ambassadors and his great wife. In cleaning the house, I exposed in the interior that it was a house built with a balloon framing. So the wood construction methods were like kind of classic American. And it was the first time that I had full access to the interior of the wood structure, because the house didn't immediately have to be a rental unit or someone's home. That I bought the house as a kind of question. And that started my ongoing life of thinking about buildings not for their ultimate economic utility, but for their potential cultural value. And that sometimes these buildings, like this building, Huguenoten House, Kassel, Germany, bombed in the Second War and hadn't been touched since 44. That in a way, the building had a bombed out area inside of it, and it had a stigma of the history of the war, therefore no one would mess with it. The rest of the building was also declared historic, so to restore it would have been very, very, very expensive. These were the absolute right conditions for me. A building that no one wanted, that had crazy stipulations, and I would say, of course, this is exactly what I want. It's a bad joke. So they said, yeah, you can have the house. It was a hotel, 24 rooms. And I decided what I would do is I would take the abandoned parts of my house in Chicago, all of the lath and the extra 2x4s and the framing materials, that I would create sections of wooden material like this small, what became a small table nightstand. I would take the lath, I would make furniture, I would make sections so that we could repair the house in Germany. I brought my band, I brought my wood and metal workshop. We hired local German builders, and for a month and a half before the exhibition, we lived in Huguenoten House as we restored it. And during the exhibition, we imagined the house like an extension of my buildings in Chicago. And that we would expose to the world how Black people celebrate. We would make available our private joy, and that private joy would wake up the good spiritual energy of the house. And then all of a sudden, thousands of people would move through Huguenoton House and would understand it not as a relic of the war, but as a space where some of the best parties ever happened in Kassel, Germany. This problem solving is what people call contemporary art, which, maybe it's architecture, bad, soft architecture. Maybe it's tactical urbanism, a word I learned at Harvard. But maybe it's possible that artists can participate in the kind of creative reactivation of formerly vacant space. Bristol made ships. That was their one jam. And those ships were ships that often carried sugar, rum, and labor from Bristol to the continent of Africa, then to the West Indies, to the Americas, back to Bristol. They were shipbuilders who participated in the slave trade by making the boats that actively moved people around. And I thought, what better than to take the former materials of these ships of commerce that held slaves and the goods from around the world and create a temporary sacred space where the activation, which was 24 hours for 24 days, would require the people of Bristol themselves to be the primary performers and activation artists. And Bristol had a growing Islamic community and an aging trades community, and those communities stayed very far away from each other. This 24-day, 24-hour project was an attempt at marrying building relationships that didn't always exist. It was a lot of fun to do that. This is a bank on the south side of Chicago. Our ambassador, my former mayor, came with his brilliant wife. I had just met our mayor not long before. He had come to the opening of one of my spaces, an affordable housing space on the south side. There's a building, there's a bank down the street that I'd really like to save, and I'd like to create a cultural space in the bank. He said, okay, do you have the money? I said, yeah. And that began a long process of what became the Stony Island Arts Bank, where we were able to convert the building into a very, very special exhibition, cultural space, where people from all over the world now have been able to be present for performances, talks, and it's just it's changed how we imagine what culture looks like on the south side of Chicago, and I'm very, very proud of it. The project that I just mentioned that Ram was at was this space that we call Dorchester Arden Housing. We took an abandoned 36-unit building and converted it into 32 units of housing with a cultural space in the middle so that the young people who live in the building and in the neighborhood would have a space for theater, dance, and music. They have sprung floors. And it's become kind of an important wellness space on the south side. This is the space from the outside. There were no cafes that I like going to, so we built one. there wasn't a decent record shop, and so we built one. And it just felt like, why must I go to another neighborhood for the things that we deserve? And if I change the energy from a complaint, from complaining about what doesn't exist in Tokoname, what doesn't exist in Arimatsu, if I could, do what people in Arimatsu and Tokoname are doing, which is to combine their efforts with other folk who care deeply about the place that they're from. Oh, that's a cool picture. And make the things happen that you want to happen. I feel very much like the work that we're doing is not rocket science. It's the hard work of believing in the place where you're from. And because we had small victories, it made me want to do bigger and bigger projects. Our garden. Now, folk got options for where they do yoga. St. Lawrence Elementary School, it's a school that has been abandoned since the late 80s. We're in the process of the restoration of that building. A 6-flat on the block that we've converted, 6 units of housing that we've converted into exhibition space and living space for artists. And while those things are happening, I'm also building things that are more like art. Outdoor monuments. This is at the Walker Art Center, and where I took St. Lawrence, the school that we're restoring. There was a church that I couldn't save. At the top of the church was a concrete statue of St. Lawrence and a bell, the calling bell. And those things were without a home, and the demolition guys were happy to charge me money for the statue and the bell. I bought the statue and the bell, and we made a permanent home for that in the Walker garden. I really enjoyed making that pavilion, and when the Serpentine Pavilion invited me to do an exhibition, I decided to expand that idea with Black Chapel, a space where we could perform, reflect, be quiet. And then there were these poetic moments that I try to make happen. This is an old hardware store on 93rd and Halsted, further south. The owner, a very amazing person, had put his son and daughter through medical school, Brother Ken, and was ready to retire and spend his time in India, and wanted someone that would care for the building. So I said that I'd care for the building. And what I ended up doing was taking the contents of the building and kind of making this permanent hardware store that is a space for conversation and rosé, which I like a lot. Okay. This is Tokoname, Marori House. A family that was very active for a couple hundred years in the production of dokan, sewer pipes, and probably did pretty good providing sewer pipes, iron-rich clay, these beautiful kind of brownish red pipes were probably being shipped all over the country because they could go easily from the port of Tokoname, Ise Bay, and it could kind of move comfortably across the country. And then plastic happened, right? So this is a lot like in the States, the state of Ohio was a state that did lots of manufacturing of car parts. So one city is known for windshield wipers. One city is known for windshields. Another city is known for tires. And when you're a single industry town, it makes it tough when the industry goes away. So I think about this a lot, but also because of the clay, it meant that there were also potters in Tokoname. And for a time, Tokoname was one of the 7 great places for ceramics, along with Bizin and Shigaraki, Iga. Tokoname was one of the great cities. It had a great city kiln, a huge Noborigama, a climbing kiln, and friends of mine today their family were the operators of that kiln. When Mami and Mr. Obayashi invited me to participate in the triennial, I thought, rather than bringing my pots, which were not that good relative to Tokoname potters, rather than bringing sand to the beach, is there something else I could bring to Tokoname that would be a kind of contribution? And I decided to bring the albums of Marva Jolly, a black potter who loved female soul singers, Aretha Franklin, Roberta Flack, Gladys Knight and the Pips. She had all of this amazing music, and she always wanted to go to Japan. When she passed, she left me her albums. And I thought, let me bring Marva through her albums to Tokoname. We played music every day, and this building has now become my workshop. The Pottery House also had an amazing kiln, which we're working now to reactivate, and our hope is to be able to fire it once or twice a year in honor of the potters who work there. My team and I are now actively making in Tokoname, and it's just an amazing town. I hope you visit if you haven't. These things bring me to this idea of Afro-Mingei. Afro-Mingei really is a proposal. That Mingei seems to also be about the celebration of beautiful, excellently made objects, made by people of common circumstance for themselves and everyday people. Mingei was also, to me, a way of resisting a certain kind of Western homogenization. That as the West was coming with their 3-piece suits and their monocles, their watches, their dresses from France, that we wouldn't forget kimono, yukata, chawan, that we would still hold true to the values that were Japanese, even though the things of the West were very seductive sometimes. This idea of Mingei reminded me a lot of the Black is Beautiful movement, a moment where when Black people were being given opportunity through affirmative action in America to participate in the corporate world, to go to colleges and have that access finally in the 50s and 60s, they had to make decisions of how much will we conform to the rest of the American system. And one of the things that they did to resist the American system was say, my hair isn't straight like yours. It don't do what your hair does. I'm gonna wear an afro. I'm gonna wear clothes that represent my history in Africa. I'm gonna name myself with a name that is from the continent where I'm from. It's a kind of resistance. 2 resistance movements, to me, based in beauty and using beauty in part as a tool to help remember who we are. So I'm happy to be a visitor in Tokoname. And by being a potter who loves making chawan, guinomi, yaki, Tokoname yaki, that I get to participate in the ongoing celebration of a cultural resistance by bringing a cultural resistance of my own. Thank you very much.